Donnie and Dolly. The team is supported by ableauctions.ca. Closing your business? We can help.
All of today's guests, including Farhan Lalji, standing by in Ottawa, are brought to you by the Vancouver Giants. The Giants would like to thank their fans for their support this season at the LEC. Can't wait to welcome them back for 2023-2024. Get your season tickets for next year now at vancouvergiants.com/season tickets. Farhan Lalji joining us now from TSN. He's in Ottawa. Farhan, thanks for doing this. How are you?
I'm good. Just sitting here at the CFC Prospects game. They're behind me. That's part of the athletic complex here at the University of Ottawa. The players are out on the field. And, it's the top high school football players in Canada. I've got a chance to call this game for the last 3 years, so it's going to be fun. And this one's an interesting one because they've also got a youth game the next day here in Ottawa as well. And my son's playing in that. So that'll be fun to get to sit around and have some father time as well as work time.
All the best to Luke. The big question, Farhan, the Hayak parade takes place Saturday in New West. Have you found a grand marshal? Because Rick and I are well aware you must be desperate because you asked us.
Yeah, we did. My wife actually thinks so much of you, Don, that she said, could Donnie and Rick do this? And I said, well, I should ask because Rick's actually a New West guy.
There you go.
For all the viewers out there, to tell you how big time these guys are, I didn't even get a response for a week. Now,
but you did get a response.
I did, but I'm assuming you guys must have thought I meant to send that to somebody else.
You texted us in Whistler. Yeah, we're busy. Not a good time.
Well, there's no parade in Whistler, right? Like, you can come here. Rick, you need to get back to your roots. You're an NWSS grad, or at least
I'm not sitting in a car. I'm not sitting in a car in a parade and having people throw eggs at me. Nah, not going to happen.
You know what? I've done the Marshall thing before. It's a lot of fun. You can take yourself way too seriously. Just wave, do the Queen thing, and just wave a little bit like that.
Man, and I thought they were desperate asking us. You were the Grand Marshal one year? My God.
A few years ago, yeah. Look, I was Citizen of the Year in New West as well. So, I contributed to my hometown.
Oh, my goodness.
Well, yeah, I don't feel so bad because if I go into the Hayak parade as the Grand, I'm from Burnaby.
Yeah,
I'd be in big trouble. But
I've adopted New West as my hometown. I lived there since 2002. It's a great place to live. It's a great place to raise a family, and so of course, or we could have done Rick and the Moj.
No,
and there's just so many marketing possibilities that could have come with that because both are New West guys and both went to high school there, and yeah, they are.
Okay, let's move on from the Grand Marshal talk here. Farhan, BC Lions training camp continues in Kamloops. You're good at that. Lions training camp continues in Kamloops. They play their first preseason game in Saskatchewan. We haven't talked about this week, and I feel bad about this. But the Lions go out and get...
Wait a minute. This is where Rick asks, how do the Lions move on from Nathan Rourke? Is that the question?
No, it's who's going to win the Grey Cup.
Who's going to win the Grey Cup?
Oh, who's going to win the Grey Cup?
Yeah, and you've told us the last 7 weeks since Winnipeg. But they acquire Canadian defensive lineman Jonathan Kongbo. He played down in the NFL last couple of years with Denver, I believe, and Grey Cup champion with Winnipeg. What do they have in Jonathan?
Yeah, they've got a talented guy, right? I mean, he was able to make a difference as a rotational pass rusher the 2 years that he was in Winnipeg. But, he obviously got a tremendous amount of experience in Denver last year, just being around the best players in the world. Got a chance to get defensive snaps in 3 of those games. So I think we're going to get the best of Jonathan Kongbo. He's not a kid. He's not a rookie. He's now a bit more of a refined football player, and he wants to play. And I think that's the most important thing is that he could have bounced around the NFL, and he probably would have had some additional interest, but he wanted to get on the field and play, and he thought that was an important thing for his development. So for the Lions to do that, I think it's a great opportunity for them as well because now they can really do some things with the ratio. They can maybe commit to 3 players on the defensive side of the ball because along with Kongbo, you've also got Francis Bemi, who was their first-round draft pick, and he's looked fantastic in training camp. So you couple that with guys like Matthew Betts and David Menard and then Nathan Cherry, who was their first-round pick a year ago, and you take all of those guys, and all of a sudden you've got 5-6 legitimate Canadian defensive linemen that you can rotate through 3 spots or 2 spots at the very least, along with a Canadian linebacker. And if you go with 3, that gives you flexibility either on the offensive line or at receiver to add some more American depth. So I think to get a guy like Kongbo is a huge deal for their ratio, their flexibility, and just their defensive improvement.
Farhan, I always think the 2 preseason games isn't enough for young kids trying to make football. You don't have, like in Abbotsford, these kids can go to Abbotsford, develop all year. You got a small taxi squad, practice roster. Is there any thought to having more than just two preseason games?
Yeah, I mean, they moved from 4 to 3, and I think that was, 4 to 2, I should say. Mm-hmm. And you're right, it's difficult, but we're seeing such a trend even in the NFL now of less and less in the way of your starters playing in preseason. Yeah. Right. So you're going to see in most cases your starters play half of a game total, right? Even in the CFL. So can you get enough of an evaluation on your younger guys? And they do have controlled scrimmages and things like that. But I think one more evaluation opportunity probably isn't a bad thing. And you're seeing in the NFL how they've expanded to 17 games, and they're talking about 3 preseason games only now. And you just see such little in the way of starters being risked to injury by playing them in the preseason. So, I don't know that you're going to see more. I don't know that the CFLPA would allow it, but I think this is kind of par for the course for where football is headed, right? Less meaningless games, less meaningless exposure to injury and risk, and try to find a way to do that in a controlled practice setting.
All right, NHL down to their final 3 teams. Florida, they beat the top 3 teams in the regular season to get to where they are. I mean, this is no fluke. They beat the 3 of the top 4 teams in the regular season. But are you still surprised as an 8 seed they've done this?
Yeah, it's hard not to be, and I debate this with Tom and Drance all the time because they won the President's Trophy a year ago. Yeah. And, if you look at them, they've had a track record of success. And here they are this season. They needed like a Chicago upset against Pittsburgh just to get into the playoffs this year. And then they were down 3-1 and were on the verge of being eliminated against Boston. And then they wound up coming back and doing what they did. So, it does speak to the roster, but this isn't the exact same team, right? I mean, when you look at that Matthew Tkachuk trade, that was a franchise-altering trade for them. So, that was going to take some time to get figured out. But, you look at that, you look at the coaching change in the last couple of years. So this is a different team than maybe the team that had some regular season success. So I do think that what they're doing right now, that makes it even more impressive because it's not simply enough to say this is the exact same team. They just stubbed their toe in the regular season. So what they're doing right now is impressive. Their top players are playing their best. They're not relying on goaltending. I think it's a complete team. And I don't know how Vegas sees it, but I think they should be favored over Vegas, right? Regardless of how the sports books see it. And I think right now they're probably underdogs. I haven't looked at it today, but the way they are playing right now, and I think they've been outstanding. And look, you could certainly make the case that Carolina outplayed them in 3 of 4 games, all of these being 1-goal games, 2 of them being overtime games, and 1 essentially was an overtime game with a goal with 4 seconds left. But the way these guys are able to play in big moments, the way Matthew Tkachuk's playing, these guys are, I don't like cliches, but they sure look like a team of destiny, don't they?
No question about it. A lot of grit there. Farhan, we ask you this every week, along with Rick asking you who's going to win the Grey Cup in 2023, but the latest on SFU's football program.
Good and bad, right? Like, when we last talked, there was a lot of encouragement with the advisor, and that's been good. And we asked the university to give a small olive branch to these players by opening up the locker rooms and also giving them a chance to get access to strength and conditioning programs, right? Because there still are going to be a lot of players that stay at the school. And I think the university admin was willing to do that, but I think there's been some pushback in the athletic department. So there's been some mixed messaging. They haven't gotten into the locker rooms yet. They haven't gotten that access to the strength coaches, even though we thought it was headed that way. And I think they need to do that. President Johnson talked about reestablishing trust. Something small like this does that. And then when you have this mixed messaging and the pushback from the athletic department, it takes away that trust. So hopefully they can get that sorted out because these kids deserve that opportunity given what they've been through in the last 6 weeks.
Okay, Farhan, one more, if you don't mind. And you and I share something in common. We both got in trouble earlier this week from the folks on social media, our Delaney's OK Tiring Langley inbox and all of that, because we talked about the late, great Jim Brown and didn't bring up what he did off the field, which reportedly was awful abuse of women. But just your memories of the late, great Jim Brown on the field at the very least.
Yeah, and I'm not here to dismiss or minimize anything that happened with him off the field. I know there were allegations and charges and ultimately not a lot of that stuck, which didn't mean something didn't happen. So I'm not trying to minimize that at all. But your question was what he did on the field. I think concentration of time that he played, because he cut his short for non-injury related reasons. The two best I've ever seen, right? And when you look at what Jim Brown did in his time in Cleveland, if he had stayed that year, when he was 30, retired, because essentially the owner at the time said, sure. But he, when they said, no, get back here right now, he said, no, forget it. I'm going to step back and I don't want to play anymore. Mm-hmm. They probably win the first Super Bowl that year, right? But this guy was an incredible player. He did it so many different ways physically. And when you look at just his overall athletic ability, right? Even what he did as a lacrosse player and other things, this guy was a tremendous, tremendous athlete. So it was certainly a loss for the NFL to lose him as early as they did. You have to consider him. I mean, that period of time, you could make the case for greatest player ever that wasn't a quarterback. I mean, I know we give that moniker of the GOAT to Tom Brady because of the number of Super Bowls he won, but the best player ever, the most physically dominant player ever, may have been Jim Brown.
Yeah. Well said. Farhan, thanks for this. We didn't have the greatest transmission on that last answer. No shortage of people in the inbox saying you've never sounded better. Thanks for this, Farhan. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. We'll talk next week. It'll be cleaner.
Okay. No, it was fine. Thanks to Farhan Lalji of TSN.